Alright, I'm Abby Schlantz, and my presentation is Doctor Who, Science Fiction or Fictional Science. For those of you who may be familiar with Doctor Who, I am in fact dressed as the Ninth Doctor. For those of you who are not, and may not be familiar with the show at all, it is a British sci-fi television show that has been on air for over 50 years. And its original purpose was to educate people, and mostly kids, about history and science. And it's about an alien who travels through time and space in a little blue police box that's actually a spaceship / time machine. So, most of the long-running, in-depth theories of the show are actually very scientifically accurate, due to the fact that it was originally used for educational purposes. But now more recently, it's more of a science fantasy show, but a lot of the theories are still relevant. The writers still managed to overlook a lot of small but important facts and have a lot of errors in some more recent episodes. So we're going to look at 3 specific episodes that have errors in them, and one that actually has an unlikely theory that makes sense. So, the first episode is called The Unquiet Dead. In this episode, the Doctor meets these creatures. You can kind of see them, they're the blue lights around the people. They're gaseous creatures that inhabit corpses, human corpses, and eventually turn them into zombies. So while this is a creepy and very entertaining idea, it actually would not make sense due to the fact that gases seek an equilibrium. And when bodies decay, the bacteria inside the bodies release gases. So the bodies are full of a lot of these gases released by the bacteria, and it would be incredibly difficult for the Gelth to move from an area of lower pressure outside into the higher pressure inside the bodies. So it's a waste of energy, and so these creatures really wouldn't exist in nature. It just doesn't entirely make sense for that reason. The next episode we're going to look at is called Bad Wolf. And in this one, the Doctor faces one of his most notorious enemies, the Daleks. The Daleks are trying to invade Earth, and this satellite you can kind of see right here, these are the Dalek ships. And they are in hiding, using a cloaking device so they can't be seen. And the inhabitants of the satellite are still confused because they have been using sonar detection to try to find the Daleks, and the Daleks didn't show up on the sonar, so they didn't really understand why. Well, one reason could be the fact that sound does not travel through vacuums, and therefore sound doesn't travel through space, which is a vacuum. So sonar wouldn't work since it's a sound-based form of detection. So that is a very basic fact that we learn early on in physics. Like most basic physics courses will teach you that. So the writers managed to overlook that. And then the third episode we're going to look at is The Impossible Planet. In this one, the Doctor explores a planet that should by all means be impossible because it orbits a black hole. And in this episode, the Doctor meets some interstellar researchers who are researching this planet for that very reason. And they're confused as to why the planet exists. However, they may not be entirely the best people to reference this because they refer to the orbit as geostationary, suggesting that the planet orbits another planet or an earthly object, when in fact it orbits a star. So the correct terminology for this would be astrostationary or simply stationary. But the more pressing question of this is a planet orbiting a black hole actually even possible? And the answer is yes. As long as the planet is orbiting outside of what's known as Schwarzschild's radius, which is 3 kilometers per unit of solar mass of the central object, it will not be sucked in by the vacuum of the black hole. So the planet theoretically could exist as long as the tidal forces between the black hole and the planet were not too strong that they would rip the planet to pieces. The planet would most likely not be inhabitable though because there's a lack of light since the black hole does not emit any light, being a vacuum. Unless here, what you can see, this disk is called an accretion disk, which occurs around black holes, and it is matter that is slowly being sucked in and forms a disk. If these would emit some kind of light or heat, then it could be possible, very, very small chance that the planet would be habitable. But overall, the planet itself could very well exist. So, in conclusion, Doctor Who goes into some very in-depth theories that do, in fact, make sense, but they overlook very minute details, but they should be common sense to everyone. So it's just kind of interesting. You can see where their priorities are in the series. And there's actually one other long-running error that has been since the Third Doctor, which, for any of you who know, the Doctor regenerates every so often. The Third Doctor was back in the 60s or 70s, where he says, reverse the polarity of the neutron flow. Neutrons don't have a charge, so it's impossible to reverse their polarity. And the writers realized this very early on, but they just kind of continued as a running joke through the show, so they are aware of that error. I just thought that was interesting. So thank you for listening. You guys have been fantastic, as the Ninth Doctor would say.